Hi, folks, and welcome to another episode of Atom or A Touch of Multiplatform. My name is Pamela Hill, and I'm developer advocate at JetBrains. I'm joined by my co-host today, Justin. Justin, won't you introduce yourself?
Thanks, Pamela. Great to be here again. I'm Justin at Touchlab. I'd always love to have new people on Atom. Pamela, who do we have today?
Yeah, so we have some lovely folks from Sentry to talk about their Kotlin Multiplatform SDK. We haven't had SDK people on before. So we usually start the episode with an awkward or nerdy confession, and today is about gaming. So I'm currently playing the game Stray on PlayStation. So I'm so bad at playing any kind of like strategy game or like first person shooting or whatever game, but I think I can manage being a cat. Justin, how about you? Are you playing anything interesting?
Does Minesweeper count as interesting? I recently
Yes.
got back into it because one of the developers at Touchlab was talking about how he created a Minesweeper game in Compose, and then I was like, oh, and my son is just about the same age that I started doing that, so I got on my phone, started playing it again. I also am terrible at first-person shooters, so I stay away from those.
Cool.
Yeah.
So as we mentioned, we're joined by the folks from Sentry. Manoel and Gino, why don't you introduce yourself? We'll start with Manuel.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for having me. My name is Manoel. I work at Sentry, and unfortunately, I don't play games at all. I was very addicted when I was younger, and I just gave up, for some social time. But yeah, Gino.
Hi, my name is Gino. I'm currently an intern here at Sentry, and currently I'm playing a lot of VR games, specifically this game called Arizona, which is kind of like a zombie shooter game, which is cool, but it's also hard to not get sick, kind of VR sick. You get very
The
easily
VR,
nauseous.
yeah.
Okay.
When you said Arizona, I immediately thought of the old game Desert Bus. Like, is this a VR version of just going across the desert for hours on end? What in the I guess a lot of gamers I see on Twitch, like they're actually quite fit. And I was looking at your bios, and both of you are like really into keeping yourself fit. And for people like me who are not like that, do you have some tips or fitness hacks that can help us get into that sort of state of mind?
I think it all starts with routine, because I think the first 2 weeks getting back into, let's say, not only gym but any sport at all is hard. You have to like convince yourself that you should go, and it usually takes like 1 or 2 weeks to get into a certain rhythm and to be able not to think too much about not going. So at some point you just go without even thinking about it, and that was mainly for me the past 3 years. Now it's kind of dwindled down a bit because of COVID, and I don't have kind of like the same passion anymore in regards to sport as back then. But I'm also trying to get back into it.
Yeah, for me, it's like you have to find your patience as well. So, for example, if I go to the gym and I have to work out by myself, it just doesn't work. It gets very boring. So I prefer some kind of sports that's like in groups. So, for example, boxing, there's a coach there that helps you out. There's, you meet people, you meet friends there. So you do together. There's always someone pushing you to go, even further. And that helps a lot. And always like, for example, when you mix up with a diet, so you kind of see your progress, faster and constant, that's very rewarding as well. And that helps me a lot as well.
Okay, so like social aspects and things like that is important. Got it.
Yeah, I think I need both of those. I definitely need someone yelling at me. That's probably going to help.
No, you don't need somebody yelling at you. So can you tell us about Sentry, Manuel, please? What kind
Sure.
of company is it? What does the company do?
Yeah, sure. So Sentry is a error monitoring and application performance monitoring platform. So, for example, when your app crashes, you need to know what happened, right? You don't have your ID running on people's device, so you cannot see the stack trace. So Sentry works like that. You install an SDK, and then automatically those crashes are sent to Sentry, and later on you can read, what really happened and where. Of course, we do more than just error monitoring. So recently we added profiling capabilities on the mobile SDKs and some other SDKs as well. There's also session replay on web, so you kind of know what happened in the browser before an error in the last 30 seconds. There's also Chrome's job monitoring. So it's really like a monitoring platform around pretty much every technology.
Okay. And how do you find the mindset of doing traditional mobile development differs? How do you think your job from doing a mobile SDK differs from traditional mobile development?
Right. So there are a few differences. For example, on mobile, when you do an SDK, people have to install your SDK, and let's say that there's a bug, you have to fix something. People have to upgrade your SDK in their apps. They have to publish to the store, and that takes weeks or even months. So you really have to take that in consideration because, yeah, you cannot really, do a mistake because a lot of users will take a lot of time to see update. For backend SDKs, for example, it's like a mobile SDK. It's one person using. It's less resources hungry. But in a backend SDK, for example, there is millions of requests comes in, per second maybe. And if you have like a memory leak or something, you can really bring down the server. So that's also very important for backend SDK. So there is a little of trade-offs on how you tackle the problems depending on the platform that you are working on.
Manoel, I saw that you also know Flutter, React Native, Kotlin Multiplatform. What do you consider the pros and cons or strengths and weaknesses of them?
Sure. Yeah, I don't believe there is like the silver bullet that works for every problem. It's always a matter of trading off, understanding what problem you want to solve, and then you pick up what makes more sense. So for example, for Flutter, Dart is a very easy language. It's very similar to TypeScript, even Kotlin. So the learning curve should not be that high. So if you know one of those. Also, Flutter has hot reloading. So you can see, developing UI is pretty fast. So you don't have to recompile everything every time. So that's, in my opinion, some pros. Cons, for example, for Flutter, since you have to write plugins for every platform, if you want Flutter running everywhere, you have to make some abstractions. For example, if you're using isolates, which is similar to threads on Flutter, that doesn't work on web. So sometimes it's a bit, you have to do some abstractions, and that's sometimes not so nice. On React Native, for example, it's a React app, right? So if you are a web developer, you can get a POC running pretty fast. Although the React Native tooling recently it introduces quite a few breaking changes more often because they are implementing this new architecture. So we are often like experiencing some tooling pain, and that slow you down a little bit. Kotlin Multiplatform, for example, it's focused on shared business logics rather than the UI, right? But maybe with composing coming in the future for Android and iOS, that would be, a very nice technology to work with for, full cross-platform experience.
Yeah, I know hot reloading is one of the things that everybody talks about. But I think Google and Apple were learning from that when they came out with like Swift UI and Compose. Do you find that working with Kotlin Multiplatform? Well, you work on SDKs, so maybe you don't even think about the UIs very much. But do you think that using Kotlin Multiplatform with Compose or Swift UI like sort of bridges that gap where some of the pros of Flutter and React Native are?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, just by being those declarative UIs already makes it nicer to work with. But the hot reload as well, I believe it really speed up, and it's a better developing experience overall anyway. So I really think that's the way to go.
Nice. So, Gino, Sentry has started with you've been developing some open source projects on GitHub, sort of in the open, including your experimental KMP SDK. What's it like working in the open?
I think it's great to have everything in public. It provides transparency to the project, but I think it's also a good thing to be able to take criticism and feedback from maybe who is a stranger and it's also important to not take certain things personally. But overall, I think it can be a great experience, and also can learn a lot from other people and other projects as well that you incorporate in your own open source project.
Manuel, why do you think Sentry is investing in open source? Why did you your company decide in that strategy?
Sure. Yeah, Sentry is open source from day one, I guess. But yeah, so Sentry is, we are building products for developers, and open source is the best way for us to talk to our customers and the community, right? Also, open source helps to build trust because people can read and run the code themselves. So yeah, enterprise companies, there is a lot of compliance. So when they really can see what type of code you're running, they really have the trust on you much more than when it's everything closed source. I think those are one of the foundations of Sentry.
Nice. Also, I wanted to ask about how can you encourage? So often we have individuals creating these KMP libraries rather than big companies. There are, of course, many companies that do create libraries of their own. But how would you encourage other companies to start investing in open source?
Yeah. So yeah. Well, every company usually, for example, if it's a Kotlin Multiplatform technology or any other platform, they always depend on most likely open source libraries anyway, right? And they always build their own libraries internally. Maybe they try to make in a bit more generic way and just publish that part so people can reuse that and use that as a starting point. I think it's a great way.
And I'm definitely excited about the Kotlin Foundation being announced at KotlinConf is going to really help companies to see where they can contribute. Like I would love to see Sentry in there. Touchlab is one of the members in there right now, and open source has been part of our company culture for a long time, and JetBrains as well, Kotlin open source. They love seeing contributions from the community in all of our stuff. And because Kotlin Multiplatform, it goes across industries. Manuel, you were saying before about Sentry needs to be on web, it needs to be on all the mobile platforms. Where do you see, when you're building for all these broad use cases, where different industries, for example, healthcare versus gaming, how do you make sure that your SDK is going to work well in those different scenarios?
Yeah, there are certain type of applications that you really have to, really do it well. For example, if you are working on a health app that controls insulin intake, if you have a bug about the dosage, you can really kill somebody. So that's a really big problem. Some other apps, for example, a marketplace or any other, maybe you can, lose some money, but it's probably revertible, so not really a big issue. Yeah, when you're working on SDKs, you really have to take that seriously. It's important to test really well, not only unity tests, but also integration tests, end-to-end tests. It's also important to test on a very broad devices, like for example, running on a device farm, your tests. So different brands, different modules, because you can face bugs that you only find in the wild when you are really, running on 30,000 different types of devices. So I believe testing is definitely the way to go, and as much as possible in a different broad device. Yeah.
We might have to edit out this question, but I just really need to ask. When we were in Android shop, Samsung devices were always the ones that we had the most difficulty making sure worked across everywhere. Do you find that's still the case? Is there another manufacturer that's always a pain point for you?
Yes, for sure. There are always some devices that they have their custom version of the Android operating system, for example, and they really do something that, yeah, sometimes you cannot really even test because you can never find those devices even to buy or to, on a device farm. And you even think, how is it even possible? Yeah, it's really hard to reproduce as well, so it's very hard to fix. Most of the time this happens with Chinese devices that you cannot really find in Europe or in North America. Yeah, we really struggle with that as well.
Okay. I have a question for Gino. What challenges? So you were basically developing most of the SDK together with mentorship from Manuel. What challenges did you encounter while developing the SDK with KMP?
So one of the initial challenges, I think, was not knowing how to embed our Sentry Cocoa SDK into the Kotlin Multiplatform SDK. The initial solution was to just use CocoaPods and get it running as fast as possible. But I think optimal way would be just to grab headers and just trim whatever we don't need, and you see interop on that, which is also something that Kevin suggested last year as well.
What would you have liked to know? Like, if you had started today, what would you have liked to know today? What you actually know now? I mean, in terms of like, just taking that knowledge that you've gained in the meantime, and what would you like to tell your past self about? Like, what would you like to whisper in your ear about KMP?
I think it ties back to my first answer, which would be to not use CocoaPods. I think,
Okay.
yes, that's most likely what I would start with.
It's CocoaPods is definitely very
Yes,
tricky.
yeah.
It's very tricky. What did you find took more time than expected? Was it also the CocoaPod stuff or something else?
Surprisingly, no. It's more about the publishing of the SDK. So we have an internal release tool, which is called Craft. It's also open source. And at the time when we wanted to publish the SDK, it didn't support artifacts that were produced for our Kotlin Multiplatform. So I had to adjust the integration, which is using Maven, to support those. And that took a lot of time. And that was very painful.
I just looked up Sentry Craft, and I was fully expecting it to start with a K because we're talking about Kotlin here. But luckily, it is spelled the way that you would expect it to.
What did you find, took way less time than expected? What went absolutely swimmingly for your KMP development?
I think for sure the Java and Android SDK. So as expected, it was pretty smooth,
Nice.
and it just worked out of the box pretty much.
Yeah, well, that is kind of as expected. One would hope.
Yeah.
Okay. And a follow-up question just about unique challenges that you found in. So this is sort of like, digging more into the details of things. Unique challenges that you found in capturing exceptions and crashes on iOS in KMP. What was the challenges and how did you solve them?
Yeah, so one of the challenges was especially regarding crashes, which would by default not give you any useful stack trace at all if you crash your app in your Kotlin shared code. So we were researching this during that time, and we're lucky to find that during that time, Rick Clefus, I hope I'm pronouncing his name, actually did pretty much the same thing we wanted to do. And we took basically his approach as a base for how we do it now. And yeah, so big shout out to Rick. He's doing a lot of great work.
Shout out to Rick. He's doing some awesome work on Kotlin Multiplatform and developing libraries and solutions and even annotations that help with Swift interop. He's extremely a valuable member of the community.
Yeah, once again, our community helps everybody here, and one of the things that they let us know is where, like, especially where JetBrains and Touchlab can help, where everything's falling short, and they could get more out of Kotlin Multiplatform. For both of you, Manuel and Gino, what do you think is the next thing, or should be the next thing in Kotlin and KMP?
For me, I think since Compose Multiplatform for iOS is now alpha, I think it's exciting to see when it eventually becomes stable that Compose Multiplatform for Android and iOS could potentially become a go-to solution or at least a strong alternative for cross-platform development. So that's definitely very exciting.
Yeah, I second Gino here. Compose on Android and iOS, or Compose Web with was WebAssembly also would be great. I think that's it's going to be a very challenging for the other cross-platform technology as well. I really love Kotlin as well, so it would be awesome.
I wanted to ask about Kotlin Multiplatform and WASM specifically to you, Gino, as well. What makes you so excited about it? I noticed, I think there was even a shout out for it at the Google I/O yesterday. I think I saw something like that. What makes you excited about WASM, about Kotlin Multiplatform and WASM together?
Yeah, I think potentially in terms of web development, being able to write front-end code with Kotlin, which then compiles to WASM, I think it's a significant direction the way web development could go. Maybe in the future also the thought of like writing compose code and then that compiles to WASM is also intriguing. And generally, it's not even like specifically to Kotlin. It's like the technology of WASM right now. It's can be used, for example, in also serverless environments, since like the instantiation time for WASM is pretty quick. And for example, Docker containers also support now WASM in experimental mode, which is also pretty cool.
Gino, so there was a hackathon where you were working on something. Can you tell us about how what you were working on and what was that hackathon like?
Basically, in regards to Kotlin Multiplatform, it actually was a hackathon or hack week project in 2020. I was not there, but it was actually proposed by Manoel and Philip, one of our Sentry Cocoa SDK engineers. And the initial POC for the Kotlin Multiplatform SDK was then developed by Philip. And when I came as an intern in 2022, I was able to choose one of the projects for my internship. And one of them was Kotlin Multiplatform SDK. And I saw a great potential in it. So I decided to work with what we had at that time, which was the POC, and use that like as a foundation for the SDK.
That's so cool. A lot of KMP stuff comes out of hackathons and people trying it out. Manuel, since you were coming up with that idea of the hackathon, what kinds of environment creates a successful hackathon?
There are a few things that are important. So, for example, people should be able to really focus on the hackathon and not rather taking meetings on the side, doing some side gig on the side. So, really focus on the project you are working on for that week. The company, for example, should also provide everything needed for that hackathon to be successful. So, for example, some budget for hosting services or anything else that you really need. For me, it's extremely important also to collaborate in person. I think that hackathons in person are much more engaging because you can connect to people, you can have lunch together, dinner together. So it's like a full-time, constantly collaborating with your peers, So even during lunch, you are still discussing that thing. So you don't take any breaks. And for me, that's very engaging. And the last thing is that the ideas should come from the people themselves. So not like the company proposed the things, but rather you come up with, the thing that you are interested on. And for me, it's also pretty cool that later on, there is this presentation. Everyone presents their, hackathon projects. And the company really invests the time to, let's say, make a voting at the end. And if the ideas are nice and they make sense for the product, they even later on incorporate into the product. And it's really nice to see something that you worked on during a hackathon later on being a product in the company. That's really cool.
Yeah, that's so cool. Gino, was that the first hackathon you've ever done?
Yes, but my hackathon where I was participating, I was doing actually a different project, not Kotlin Multiplatform, which was more like internal tooling.
Cool. And as someone new to the industry, you mentioned that you're an intern, and I'm reminded of the Kotlin Conf contest that was bringing in universities, and it was really cool stuff that they were coming out with. I believe you need a lot of mentorship from professors when you have that internship from whoever is your boss or whatever it's called when you're an intern. How do you feel works best in terms of getting mentorship?
I think what's important is that you're be able to give the chance or be able to be given the chance to decide certain things. For example, in our case with me and Manuel gave me a lot of chances to decide and allowed me the autonomy to do different things. And I think for certain things, it's okay to be more or less hand-holding at the beginning. But I personally think I learned better in a more autonomous environment, which in our case, I think worked pretty well. So, for example, if I didn't know something, for example, the publishing of the SDK, which was pretty difficult, Manuel tried to help me go into the right direction, but ultimately referred me to certain channels and teams that could help me out better. And I personally had to drive those things and had to talk to the teams myself instead of getting everything to Manuel. So it allowed me to work out some things and be more communicative with other teams as well, and not only like stand behind Manuel, basically. But every time I was stuck, I never felt like I was alone. So I always had like Manuel here, or generally the Sentry team.
So, Manuel, I'm going to put you on the spot now, since it sounds like you've been a great mentor. What is your philosophy on mentorship, and like how can folks become better mentors?
Sure. Yeah, there are a few things. So, for example, for me, it's always important to be empathetic. So, people yourself on people's shoes and being friendly and accessible whenever needed. So, you also didn't know everything, right? Everything takes time to learn. Um, yeah, I think like the mentee should feel part of taking decisions rather than you tell them what to do, right? They really have to feel that they are taking part in the decision and understanding the problem, and there are trade-offs, so you just have to make that clear. And hard skills are always learnable, right? So you can help that with code reviews, but you always leave some room for them to take their own decisions as well, because sometimes there is no right or wrong, so it's okay in both ways. They just are trade-offs. Or, for example, sharing articles and resources to learn from when you see a gap in some hard skills. But my main goal, to be honest, is rather to focus on soft skills, letting the person know that they own and drive this. So I don't want to be the middleman, to connect them with people, the right projects, the right channels. I want them to drive that. I just give the guidance. Of course, if they get blocked or they need some hand holding, that's totally fair, and we are there for that. It's also important to do a weekly one-on-one, so just to check out how it's going, if the person needs help. So just being there for them whenever needed. And in the end of their mentorship or after some time, they really should feel that they accomplished something by themselves and they can do that by themselves. And not like, hey, I just could do this because someone really was helping me all the time. So that's not my goal.
Wow, it sounds like you're a really good mentor. I wish I had someone like you at the beginning of my career, Manuel. I wanted to ask about AI and how it changes, how you think it will change your job in the next 1 or 2 years. So last night it was Google I/O, the keynotes, and it was basically just AI, AI, AI. And they introduced, well, Bard has been around for a bit, but they introduced new features and new things that about Bard. How do you think AIs or large language models like ChatGPT and Bard will change your job? And how are you kind of going about learning it?
I think in the coding space, AI will for sure make it easier, and it's already starting to get easier to code, and it also already increase the productivity, which in the future, let's in the next 1 or 2 years, might make it harder for inexperienced engineers like me, for example, harder to get into the industry. Maybe junior engineers are not even needed in like 5 years, for example. But personally, I use ChatGPT and Copilot pretty much daily. So mainly in coding, for example, for mundane or repetitive things, like let's say I'm using a function and it will just autofill the arguments that I need, or generate some template comment, and then I'll just adjust it according to my needs.
Yeah, I pretty much second Gino on that. So I also use Copilot very often. I think like AI is not taking our jobs anytime soon, but definitely helps with productivity, right? I think just like all the boilerplate, all the code that are just repetitive, and the models can learn from it, that makes productivity increases by a lot. It's also really helpful for writing documentation. So most of the time, engineers don't really like to write documentation, but ChatGPT sometimes just writes something a nicer way, more clear, concise. I really like that as well. Although I see that for less experienced engineers, since the code snippets are there just in front of you, it's just easier to take them. It's going to be harder for them to really understand, hey, this is the right thing. Does that even make sense? Is that the best approach for this problem? But yeah, so it's going to be a bit challenging for junior developers that are learning.
Definitely. You're definitely going to have to make sure that the industry is still taking in junior engineers, because eventually senior engineers like me will retire, and your junior engineers will have to sort of carry the flag for us forward. But I think it's so important what you were saying about productivity. It's taking away AI technology will be taking away things that are boilerplate, that are boring, that are things that we don't necessarily want to do. And it will give us the opportunity to be more creative and work on things that are more meaningful. I think that's really, really, really valuable. So, and I'm also looking forward to doing a little bit less documentation in my daily work. I know the other day I was extremely, I don't want to say lazy because that sounds terrible, but I was super, super lazy in finding the right tone for a tweet that I had to write for the Kotlin Twitter feed. And I asked ChatGPT, and it was really helpful. And I used the prompt joyful, and it worked really, really well. So if you ever want a chirpy kind of tweet, use the term joyful. So a lot of people in the industry, our industry is currently in flux. So people are interviewing a little bit more than what they might have been, before perhaps COVID or something like that. Manoel, what is your best interview advice?
Yeah, so most of the time, interviewers are trying to answer a simple question: can we work with this person, right? So hard skills are always important, but you can learn them over time. Soft skills as well, but they are much harder. So for me, it's just to stay relaxed, pay attention, ask questions, be curious, just be verbose in your communication and show your intentions when you're doing something. It's also okay to not know everything, so just be transparent and honest. Just tell I don't know when you don't know. It's totally fair. Yeah, but prepare questions as well. Be curious, research the company, look at the job description, see what you know and what you don't, and really have a nice conversation. Most of the time, it's about that. Obviously, if it's a coding challenge, maybe study a little bit before. That helps a lot.
Yes, absolutely. I think what you're saying is so important because, not only are you being interviewed, but the company is being interviewed as well. You want to make sure that the dynamic between the individual and the company is spot on, and so that everyone is happy with the end result. Gino, what is the best way? I mean, you're busy with your internship at Sentry at the moment. What is the best way for folks to get started in the industry? Would you suggest internships, or how did you get started?
For sure, internships. But I would also say nowadays it's also getting harder and harder to get even internships. So to get even to the interview stage, I think it's also important to do side projects. Just picking something that you're interested in and trying to find certain problems you want to solve. And most of the time also, let's say inexperienced engineers like myself would be stuck in a never-ending loop of what to choose, which framework to use, which language to use, etc., etc. And I think it's personally just enough to use some framework or language that is generally regarded as good for a certain use case, because we can't really rate right now what's best in the future. So just stick to something, use it, and learn on the way. And also, just to add a little bit to the coding interviews, I think it's one of the most dreaded things for students, something like lead code and so on. But I think it's important, and you just have to play the game. That's how it works. It's important to at least study for it, even though students might hate it.
It's not just students. I think everybody hates coding interviews. I can't think of a single person that ever said to me, "Oh, they just waited for this challenge."
Fair. Yeah, that's fair.
Um, my cat just jumped on my lap, but actually, with we finished up the volley, having volley on Atom, and that's been released. And people were telling us we should have more cats in the background, though this one wants to be in the foreground.
Foreground.
If for people who are interested to know more about Sentry and how they could, work at Sentry, how could they get in touch and find out more? What can you tell them?
Sure. Yeah, Sentry has a public Discord server, so we are always hanging out there. So just join us and chat with us. There's, of course, GitHub, Twitter, or even Sentry's engineering blog. We are also attending conferences very often. So next one is going to be DroidCon, FlutterCon in Berlin, July. So in case you are there, pass by our booth and say hi.
Yeah, so we're also joined today by a special guest, Kevin from Touchlab. Kevin was so excited to hear that the folks from Sentry will be on the show that he asked if he could ask some nitty-gritty details about their SDK, or like Nacho Libre says, needy greedy. It's a classic movie. Kevin, why don't you introduce yourself and take the show away?
Hello, and thanks for having me. I'm Kevin Galligan, Kotlin chief nerd or something. We were trying to figure out. No, I'm the technical partner of TouchLab, and we got started really early with the Kotlin Multiplatform platform or movement. Anyway, yeah, I was going back a little bit of history. Was we launched this crash reporting extension for Kotlin Multiplatform in 2019 at DroidCon San Francisco, and then reminiscing before the call, it turned out Manoel was one of the folks at the table, the sponsor booth, and I was trying to get Sentry to work that morning. It did not work out, but it was good to catch up. And then, but yeah, then we've had various versions of community supplied Sentry support. Let's say with various success rates, and then it was really excited to hear that there was going to be an official one coming from the Sentry team, and it is the first official first party crash reporting library. So it was really great. It's really good to see companies take it seriously as a platform that's obviously up and coming. So my questions, I was playing with it this week a little more. We have feedback I'll send. And we were chatting last year too, especially around the CocoaPods and the linking stuff. But that is all kind of deep nitty gritty because it's one of those things where, Kotlin multi-platform to Android and iOS developers is a new thing. So it's kind of like the Android folks understanding some of these iOS technical stuff, and the iOS people not really, understanding the Kotlin ecosystem. So it's coming together. So I think some of this was obviously covered. That's some of the questions I wanted to ask in the earlier part, how this got started, and it got started as a hack thing, but with support from the company. And then, it seemed like it was it was open source, but it was a bit in dev limbo. We actually had, like I mentioned, Crash Chaos had some community Sentry things, and when we did a new version and refreshed everything along the lines of what Rick had done, because he definitely came and fixed a lot of some of the issues. We were like, well, this Sentry's coming real soon. So then we kind of just took it out, and we're going to add it back in if it makes sense, just after the first party thing's out. But it did seem like it was limbo for a while, but then we saw that it was officially published. So, but it's still experimental. So my questions are kind of more to you, how can the community help? What does non-experimental look like in the eyes of Sentry, individually to you two or the organization? How does that happen?
Yeah, so there are a few pending things still to call it GA. So for example, we should still simplify the installation process, and things like uploading the debug symbols for iOS and the Android ProGuard mapping files. It's not, for example, well documented right now how to do it for Kotlin Multiplatform. And I think the most important thing is also to get more feedback from the community and our customers that it's working well and it's stable enough to call it not experimental.
Okay. Yeah, that was going to be my next question is what kind of feedback. But if it's just generally this is working well, it's satisfying our needs, that kind of thing.
Yeah, we need to be sure that SDK is bringing value and not crashing people's apps, right? That's very important. We don't really have a lot of people opening issues or giving feedback. So of course we test ourselves, but we need more feedback from the community overall. And yeah, of course, if you find something that can be improved or find bugs, please do raise issues on GitHub. Yeah, feedback is always welcome. Of course, we want to add more features and so on, but first we need to be sure that our basis is working pretty well.
So on that same question, I guess and feel free to say we can't talk about roadmaps, but what kind of features are you talking about, and what does the roadmap look like?
The first, obviously, we want to bring feature parity with some other SDKs. So, for example, bringing the performance API into Kotlin Multiplatform SDK. Also, being able to do profile on Kotlin Multiplatform SDKs and apps. There are many other features that we can bring on, but first, you need to be sure that the base is working really well. So, but overall, would be pretty much feature parity with the other mobile SDKs, so Android and iOS. And later on, maybe even expanding on having a Kotlin SDK first. So for example, today, if you do Kotlin multiplatform for web, will not work because pretty much the SDK depends on the native SDKs Android and iOS. Because they are written in Java, will not work for web, right? You cannot cross-compile to JavaScript. So at some point, we'll need to write a Kotlin first SDK so it can be used to transpile to JavaScript and run on the web as well. So that's definitely in the backlog. We just need, to see the growth of the SDK itself and the community being more engaged, more feedback, and be sure that we are producing something that has value and people are using it.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, some of this is going to be, coming from the Slack Kotlin world. There's I think another round of letting people know that this is live now, and probably, like you said, a little bit of the documentation smooth out. But I know there's been anecdotally, like I don't have numbers, but there's a lot of excitement around because a lot of people ask about Sentry, and they've been asking us for years. So I think this is going to be a pretty exciting thing for the whole community. I know that we kind of touched on this, but I wanted to ask Gino a question because it was like, it is funny how many times Rick's name has come up in the last month, including my live talk, but because he is kind of doing a lot of stuff. But how did you find? It is interesting, especially as an intern. Like I'm pretty amazed that you were able to get this to work because it is a problem that like most iOS developers are not trying to custom send like function pointers, and they're not doing this weird stuff. So like, how was that process? It seems like for an intern, that's a real jumping right into the deep end of the pool moment.
Yeah, it was pretty difficult. I mean, most of the work is based on Rick's implementation, so I didn't write too much myself. I just made sure that it works for our case and that it's that I understand what is being done here. And the funny thing is, a funny story. I was talking to Rick about that it's not working in my case, and he sent me a sample project that he did. It was during the development of his NS exception repo, and he sent me the exact same sample that he did, and it didn't work for me. And we tried to work out why, and it turned out that Sentry Coco SDK would filter frames if the macOS user is called Sentry for whatever reason. And then I noticed my macOS is named Sentry, so I had to change my Mac name to whatever Arctic's name, and then it suddenly worked. But we had to like pick our brains on that one. That's pretty funny.
Yeah, so I guess again, we're gonna send some feedback, and I think I do want to send maybe a little bit of PRs, assuming I can find time on some of the docs stuff that I ran into, because I went and set it up in preparation for this podcast call. And what I will say, after I got the setup, it worked fine. It's just that it was a very small sample project, so no crashing, not yet. But it was also on a simulator, and we didn't distribute it to a bunch of people. So, but anyway, on the setup page, it says choose your platform, and Kotlin's not there. So is that like needs to be stable before that gets onto the choose your platform page?
No, that's definitely a to do on our list.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. because I think they would help. And I guess finally, my question is a little open ended. If you could I guess it's more like wave a magic wand from the community. Like, what is it that you'd like to see? Obviously some feedback or whatever. But if you just had most important stuff, what would you say?
For sure, more feedback and just more community engagement. I think what is lacking right now is I can't see the pain points of users because I don't see them. So it would be for sure very, very helpful if more people could try it out, at least the installation process and so on. Because I know how it works. So for me, it's easy to do it, but can't see it from the way from other people. So I think that would be really great.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, I will say, I was going through it and it was in the back of my mind, and that's the same thing with all the Kotlin stuff at this point. It's I've been doing it for far too long at way too deep of a level to have any perspective how and a new user would approach it, So yeah, it definitely would be good to see some folks. It is eye-opening when people are like, what? I don't understand your docs. And then they start telling you, you just assume way too much. So anyway, that's it.
Yeah, I really would like to see people trying out and giving more feedback and telling us, what they want, what they need, and how we can solve their problems, and helping them just to build better apps. Because if they have issues, they can fix faster. I think that's the most important thing. The feeling that you're bringing value and the thing that you are working on, it's being used and it's useful. I think that would be awesome.
Yeah, I think in one of those things with the community, it's interesting because understanding that, especially at an organization, the organization is going to put time and which turns into money towards things that are adding value to the users, but also to the org. So that the more people that are using it and the more people that are saying that they want it and want it stable, so it's up to the community to essentially make noise and let you know that they love the work and they want you to continue. So we'll try from our end to press a bit. I also love the question about the magic wand because it puts all the pressure on you. So apologies, but hey.
So I'm gonna put even more pressure on the community now because we want to know what your magic wands are. That's it for this show. Leave your messages in the comments, whether it's about for JetBrains, for Touchlab, for Sentry. Let us know what your magic wand wishes are. And thank you so much, Manoel and Gino. It was a pleasure to have you on the show. And Kevin, thank you for appearing as our special guest today. Always appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Yeah.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.